Welcome to The Tactical Traveler, the podcast where adventure meets precision, and the journey is just as important as the destination, bringing you the inside scoop on the most thrilling and efficient travel experiences. Each episode, we'll dive into the art of travel, from navigating off the beaten path destinations to mastering the art of packing like a pro. So buckle up, get your compass ready, and let's embark on a new adventure with Tactical Traveler. Here's your host, John Rankin.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Tactical Traveler. I am super honored and excited for our guest today. I've been following him on social media for almost 3 years, and he is actually one of the people that's responsible for inspiring me to become a travel entrepreneur. And Derek, I am so excited to have you on the show. You're a professional adventurer and an author, and I just want to say right up front how inspiring you have been to me personally. And I can't wait to hear from you today and really introduce my crowd to you as somebody that they can look to for inspiration.
John, thank you for having me. And that means a lot to me to hear you say that. That's incredible that this, what I'm doing has benefited you, and happy to hear that.
Yeah, it really has. And I actually, the very first post I saw from you was about a climb you did on Mount Kilimanjaro. And I've done Mount Kilimanjaro twice. And then when I saw that you were organizing adventure trips and taking people on like world-class, like not tourist stuff, but adventure stuff, I was like, oh my God, this is like the guy I want to be. You know?
Yeah, and we, I've taken it's so funny. I take entrepreneurs into the wilderness we sort of blend coaching and extreme adventure activities. And a lot of these people, there's at least one day where we'll do something and they'll tell me that was the single hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I'm like kind of waiting for them to tell me, and I never want to talk to you again. But they're like, and it changed my life forever. And they're like, I never knew I could do something that hard. And it's like, okay, good. That's, no one was injured. We got to the top of the mountain. And I was actually talking with our mutual friend Chase afterwards, and he gave me this idea, which I had always wanted. I was like, hiking back down after, climbing Kilimanjaro or a massive other volcano is, half the journey is back down. And I was like, I wish I just had a helicopter. And he's like, why don't you just get a helicopter? Like, that's a good point. That would be an amazing surprise, right? You just climb a huge mountain and you're like, I don't want to walk home. Well, here you go. Hop on in.
Here you go. Right. So it's interesting that you brought that up. What would you say is the most exciting / dangerous / hard trip you've done with clients before?
We try to, I try to do a diversity of different trips. We do rock climbing, we've done canyoning, we've done surfing, we've done climbing volcanoes, a lot of different stuff. And it's done in such a way that a beginner could do it, but it feels, especially when you're rappelling down a waterfall, right? You could teach somebody to do that in 15 minutes. But if you've never done that before, it totally cracks your mind open. Like, what am I doing? I'm hanging over this waterfall on a rope. There's water flowing over me. I'm 50 feet up in the air. It's really, really scary, but it's also totally safe. And so it's this, your perception of how much risk you're taking is much higher than the actual risk you're taking. So those types of things like rock climbing and canyoning are actually pretty good to really shake people out of their comfort zone. And then what happens is that when we get to the in-classroom workshop, for example, like usually I alternate days on these trips where I'm doing a classroom day where we're doing business stuff or interpersonal relationship work, stuff like that. It makes them already, they want to take risks in the classroom. They want to push the limits of their creativity. They want to, take their business to the cutting edge once they've done this sort of risky stuff outdoors. So it translates really well into other aspects of your life.
Yeah. So personally, what do you think has been the hardest trip that you've done with these guys and girls?
Well, the single hardest day was we were climbing a volcano in Bali, and it's not too high. It's 12,000 feet, so you can do it in a day. And they told me, the guides, I had only climbed half of it myself, so this was actually fresh for me to climb the full volcano with clients. And they said, "Oh, you'll do it in 9 hours." And I was like, that's a pretty long day of climbing a volcano, but we're better than everyone else. You know, that sort of, you overestimate, you're
Right.
overconfident. You're like, I'm sure we'll do it in 6. I'm sure we won't be tired at all. Well, it took us like 10 and a half hours. It was already dark by the time we were done. And, you know, we were underprepared. You know, I didn't tell people to bring lights. So here we are, we're like creeping down in the darkness and everyone's totally exhausted. And it was,
Ooh.
you know, one of those, like, you're crossing your fingers that everyone's gonna make it. But at that point, everyone's committed to, because when you go uphill for 6 hours, at hour 5, you're like, hey, do you want to turn around? And the top's still an hour away, but you've done 5 hours up. And at that point, everyone sort of has to dig within themselves and say, is it worth it to me to do this? Like, I could go home.
Right.
You know, we could send a group back. And then when everyone commits, you know that it's just a matter of taking all the steps, getting to the top, enjoying the top, and then all the steps back down. And there's a really good analogy there about any large project, you know, launching a business or launching a new online course in your business or something like that, where it's like, oh my gosh, there are so many steps. It's months away from happening, but all you really have to do is just go through the steps. It's like there's a big meal in front of you. All you have to do is chew it up. And it's inevitable, but you just still have to do it. And
Sure.
there's that moment when it's like, here we are all enjoying it. And then there's a moment when everyone's just like concentrating on their own energy. Like everyone turns internal, like all the chatter stops after a few hours, and because everyone's really exhausted, and
Sure.
they're just like, I can do it. You can see it in their faces, but nobody's talking and they're just moving themselves. And that's kind of a cool place to be with a group as well. Like we're all suffering together, you know, the band of brothers type of thing. But it's different than the first, you know, couple hours when you're like, look at that crazy tree, look at that crazy bug, and like, you know, look at all this interesting stuff. So that's what I love about these types of things, because you see people in different states of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, for our listeners who haven't met you before, you know, it's not like you're definitely better shape than most people, but you're not a world-class athlete, and the people you're taking are not world-class athletes. I mean, you do a lot of biking and hiking and climbing, but you do stuff that like everyday people could really do if they set their mind on it, right?
Yeah, I took this group caving here in St. Louis. There's a lot of caves in Missouri because it's
Oh, I love it.
limestone topography, and Tennessee too, I think.
Yep.
And this woman had been in a car accident when she was a kid, and she has metal in both of her femurs. And she was like, "There's no way I can do it. Like, I'll just sit this one out." And I was like, "Why don't you just try? You know, see how far, and you can turn around at any point, right?" And she was the one by the end of the cave who was like, "Let's go explore this tiny little passage. Like, ooh, we have to crawl through the mud into a 1-foot hole. Like, I will lead the way." And you know, she was like, "This is the first time in my life I've ever been dirty." And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, "Yeah, I've never been dirty before." And I was like, that's is amazing, right? Something as simple as that can shape you know, what you think is possible in any area of your life.
Yeah. Now, let me back up a little bit here, because it's such an interesting and compelling story to me. Like, how the hell did you get started? Like, did you just wake up one day and climb a mountain and go, "Hey, I want to do this for a living and show other people how to live"? Or like, where did this all come from for you? Because it's not, I've never really heard your origin story, right? Like,
yeah, maybe I'll start with before I was an adventurer, I was in academia. I was a scientist. I was actually a virologist studying viruses in Yellowstone National Park. I was looking to find
what?
the beginnings of life.
No way, man.
Yeah, we called it extreme biology. So it was kind of adventurous. The field work, obviously, it was, working in Yellowstone, super cool.
Right.
Um, and I ended up discovering a new virus, MYSV, Metellus yellowstonensis spherical virus. It's one of the simplest forms of life, unrelated to any other known form of life. And that was super cool. But I ended up spending most of my time not in the field, but in a dark room with a microscope, 12 hours a day looking under an electron microscope. But I could see the writing on the wall for science. I could see how, you had to essentially cater to corporate interests to try to get funding, and you're competing. And it seemed like an area of research that had sort of been corrupted, and there wasn't a chance to make a lot of money or make a big impact. And so I kind of already started to know that I needed to change. But there was a year when I basically lost everything. And that prompted me to leave my PhD program as well. So I lost my house in a freak flood, like a once in 1,000-year flood in Colorado. It's not a place that really floods.
Right.
I had a traumatic brain injury, and I got
How'd you get
divorced.
the TBI?
It was a blood clot in my brain.
Oh no.
Also a very, very rare and unknown thing. And as guys do, it was like getting worse and worse. And I was like, oh, I should probably see a doctor, because it was it started off as a headache, and the blood clot itself was growing bigger and bigger and pressing on the side of my skull, and it eventually was debilitating. And so I said, okay, I can no longer function. I should probably go get this checked out. And I went to the hospital, and I was still not treating it seriously, still just sort of joking around. Did the CAT scans and CT scans, and so they sent me home, and I was like, hope you guys don't find anything. And they called me, right as I was leaving the hospital. They're like, you're about to die, like turn around, come back in right now. And they immediately, immediately stabbed me with blood thinners. And what that did was just really shove my own mortality in my face. Like, hey,
Sure.
you're like, you could go at any moment. And when you're faced with mortality like that, you say, am I doing what I want to be doing? Is this really how I want to be spending my time? And the answer was, I love science. I love discovering things and research, but it's way too slow to make a difference. It takes 2 years to publish a scientific paper sometimes. And that's me wasting my time. So I decided to, I had just read 4-Hour Workweek, decided to move.
Come on, man. That is a great book.
Yeah, and I read it as like right when it came out. This was back came out in 08, 07. And so it was always something on my mind. And I was a cycling coach. So I decided to go get 4 clients at $250 a month. They were paying me. So $1,000 a month. And I moved to Vietnam, where the cost of living I estimated was going to be about $1,000 a month. So all of a sudden I have this sort of infinite runway to experiment with different types of entrepreneurship. At that point, I didn't know if I was going to be an author or a coach, or exactly what I was going to do, if I was going to sell stuff on Amazon. But I said, I can, I've got a couple of years at least to figure this out, living in cheap places like anywhere in Southeast Asia.
Right.
And we're off to the races.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've done a lot of biking. I've seen that. So just out of curiosity, did you get a patent on that bacteria or virus you found? Like, do you get royalties for that kind of stuff?
No. And so again, this type of science is not driven by profit. It's driven by just increasing the stuff we know. It's called basic research. And because it's not profit motive driven, the funding is much harder to come by. But it's very valuable to understand, how life evolves and all of these things. But the money's in patentable genes, patentable pharmaceuticals, patentable, virus, drug delivery vectors, that kind of stuff. And so, I didn't get anything from it.
Sure.
Just a paper and a master's degree.
So with your science background, and I normally wouldn't do this just because it's a very controversial topic, but with your science background and your passion for travel, what is your view of COVID been? I mean, because you're really like the juxtaposition between the two fields that you live in. Like, you have such a unique perspective. And, you know, for the listeners, I really don't give a shit which way you believe. But your opinion, at least to me, would be super valuable because you sit right in the middle of those two fields that literally collided.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, you know, so first of all, I haven't really been following all the nonsense as much as I can. I'm trying to
Detox.
stay dry, right? Like
Right.
there's
Yeah.
like whether you're wading into the virus and the vaccine, or you're wading into gun violence in my city, or whatever it is, like there's all these causes that you could jump into, right? But
Yep.
do you want to spend your energy
Right.
trying to fix them, or trying to just like learn a bunch of things? So that's been sort of my approach with many things, politics, etc. But what I've noticed is that there's a lot of data cherry picking, and sort of both sides, like either, you know, people pushing the vaccine or people saying like we shouldn't take the vaccine. Both sides are cherry picking data, and there's a study, right? A study that says like, here's what we see in children that get the virus, right? So that's just like the basic study, but then both sides will take some little piece of data and try to spin it to their objective. So what's really important is to go all the way back to the original data and spend some time with it to see if you agree with the findings that the researchers are presenting.
Right.
And I think that's where, you know, before I was in grad school, I wouldn't have had the experience to actually sort of be able to parse a lot of data from a paper about a vaccine trial. So I think largely the public, right, is relying on experts to parse their data for them.
Yep.
But these experts may have outside influences, or they may be imperfect, or because we're dealing with complex systems. And so,
or it's motivated by profit, like you were talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, the guy, I was just watching this great YouTube discussion with the guy who invented the vaccine, the mRNA vaccine technology, and YouTube deleted it because they said this is dangerous. And so we're dealing with, you know, what's going on, you know, like, why is this discussion not allowed to happen? Because it's sort of anti the standard narrative. But any discussion should be allowed, even if it's totally wrong, right? Yep. Even if you've got the data wrong, if you've got backwards thinking, if you're interpreting it miscorrectly, it's still okay to have a free and open conversation. At least that's where I'm coming from, because that allows you to really build a complete understanding of what's really going on here. And that's what we did in my research. You know, we would see different things. We would see like, oh, wow, it seems this virus seems to be growing in these couple different environments. You know, why is that happening? So I don't know if that's helpful, but
no, it really is, because, you know, again, and I totally appreciate that, because I've actually unplugged from all that stuff as well, because I don't feel like I can trust anybody, like left, right, scientists, media. Like, it seems to me that everyone is so motivated by an agenda that's just not the common good of the people, that I really just kind of checked out. And, you know, and it's gotten to the point to where, and to make it into a less passionate issue, when you look at like our economic system and the tax system, right? You have experts on both sides of the political spectrum that will, like you said, cherry pick. And you get to a point to where, as a common citizen, like, I don't know which one of you is telling the truth. Like, I'm horrible at math. Like so I can only look at it from a very small perspective as a small business owner and look at the way that the policy would affect me personally. Um, and I think it's the same with the virus. And we've gotten to a place to where we're so disconnected from the source of the information that at the end of the day, you have to make a decision of who you're going to be trusting. And I don't know that we can really trust anybody.
Yeah, and to bring this back to travel and adventure, one thing that you get as an adventurer is, let's say you're just walking down, you're in, I don't know, Rio de Janeiro, and you're walking through the slums, right? A kind of potentially a dangerous place. You're going to be relying on your instincts. You're going to be relying on your discernment. And when people get into their rational thinking, right? So I'm going to make this argument of I want you to get a vaccine or I don't want you to get a vaccine. That's an emotional argument backed up by rational arguments. But the baseline of I want to do this or I don't want to do this is really important, because we can sort of back up with potentially rational arguments the things that we want to do or don't want to do.
Right.
But it gets dangerous when you start doing things you don't want to do because of somebody else's rational argument or your own rational argument. You convince yourself to do something you don't want to do. It's outside of your best interest, even though deep down this isn't really right for me. And that's what happened to me. That my first marriage, we were married for a year and a half. I was just kind of doing it to be nice because she really wanted to be married. And I was like, well, I like you and I want you to be happy. And so I'll get married. But I didn't really, my heart wasn't in it. So it wasn't a great reason to get married.
Sure.
And there's so many things where we abdicate our knowing of what we really should be doing due to some outside pressure or narrative or reason. So I think if people can take away, like, coming back to trusting themselves and their own intuition and discernment, that can be really beneficial here.
Yeah, that's great, man. That kind of really, helps me transition too, because man, that whole piece you just talked about is so important in coaching. I mean, this idea of abdicating away from your own internal system of decision making, right? In your deepest, darkest, parts of your soul that you should or shouldn't be doing something. And as a coach, you've got to really dig in and to help people draw that out.
Yeah, I've my own mentor calls it being domesticated, and essentially what's happening is that as kids, we're just trying to soak up as much as we can to navigate the world, and we're learning how the system works. We're learning how language and schools and family systems and all that stuff works, so we can play by the rules. And all of a sudden, you've got a whole society full of people playing by a set of rules, and you've become domesticated. And it becomes this process through coaching, or a lot of people in the self-development, on their path of unlearning their thinking, of unlearning their domestication. And that's how entrepreneurs really push the cutting edge. It's how you get to a place there where nobody's done something before, and it's almost a different identity, right? The person who's really obedient, the person who's doing they're getting A's in school, or their boss loves them because they're always on time and punctual and like delivering everything. That's the opposite identity to someone who discovers something new, or sets a world record, or takes a public risk by doing sort of a controversial piece of artwork or something like that. So you have to sort of ask yourself, do I want the identity of someone who is keeping their head down, playing nice, and just trying not to be noticed and just sort of like skate through life? Or do I want the identity of someone who's going to make a huge contribution, bring something new into the world, and at the same time take on that discomfort, that risk of, being on the cutting edge.
Yeah. I mean, that is so amazing what you just said. Like, you could literally spend hours just there. Imagine a society of all free thinkers who want to push the norm, who want to push the envelope, and whose only motivation is to improve themselves and those around them. What does that country look like?
And a good country, right? You want a whole diversity, right? You want some people that make sure the laws are followed, that write good laws, things like that. So you do want some rule followers, I think, but you also want some rule breakers. And for the people that want to be rule breakers, you have to sort of train like a positive reaction to discomfort, right? If you're never outside of your comfort zone, then you're never outside your comfort zone. And
Yep.
you have to associate benefit to yourself by taking on a physical challenge, getting outside of your comfort zone to a new country, or even, just if there's something you want to say but you're holding it back, well, if you can train yourself to say it, that's very uncomfortable, but it's often, like actually speaking your truth, right? Speak truth to power, all these things. But you have to associate that with like, this is my identity, this is what I want to be doing. It's a positive thing, even though it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, man. Talk to me a little bit about your coaching program, because what we're talking about now is so important, to me at least, that people grab a hold of what you're saying. Talk about your coaching and how you're bringing the conversation we're having right now to your clients.
Yeah, I work with, I end up working with entrepreneurs in really unique niches, 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs, whether they're digital nomads, digital entrepreneurs, or people with, like one of my clients has a series of eco lodges, and he's really pushing the limits on bringing sustainability to new indigenous communities. And so when I'm working with people, a lot of times they're hiring me as their business coach, but we end up working on a lot of things like how they're managing their own self-identity, how they're managing their energy, how they're managing their relationships, right? How they're connecting with their employees or their founders. And so there's so many in the business world, right? There's all the business skills of running the business, of like pricing and selling and all those things, which we cover. But what always ends up happening is that it's the expansion of self, like gaining more personal power to enact your will into the world. I think, all these entrepreneurs, right? They have a vision, they have a future that they want to see. And it takes power to make something like that happen, right? I like to think of it in a metaphysical terms as well. Like, you're creating a future reality. You're bringing your thoughts into physical form. And so the type of coaching I do, we're blending business and metaphysics and adventure and everything I've learned about peak performance from being an athlete. And so at any moment, it could be a mix of those things.
Like, that was so much. I want to focus on two things because I was trying to take notes, man. I love the part about, how did you say it? Enforcing your will. Was that how you said that?
On
the world?
Don't even remember what I said, but yeah, your intent, right? Your will for something to happen.
Yes.
And a lot of times I'm looking for the strongest emotional engine. Let's call it an engine, because the strength of your desire is what's going to fuel the actions that you take.
Right.
A lot of the times. And so if they're like, okay, I want to write a book, right? Or I want to launch a program, or I want to build a lodge, or whatever it is. First, we're really just digging in to find out why are you doing this? What's in it for you? Like, what's driving you? What's pulling you? What's making you feel alive with this idea? And when we can sort of illuminate that, what is it that they're searching for, this feeling that they're after by doing this thing, then we can use that as the fuel to move us forward.
Yeah. Dude, that segment there was so jam-packed. That's just amazing. And I want to pause for a second because, again, it's mostly mindset. I think anybody who's successful in any endeavor, if you stack them up against anybody else, the key factor or the key difference is mindset. What do they think? What do they believe? And I want to point out that you said you're working with 7 and 8 figure clients. Like to many people, they can't wrap their head around 6 figures, and you're talking 7 and 8 figures. That's amazing.
Yeah, I also, I really love teaching business to brand new entrepreneurs as well. I have usually once a year, I'm taking a group of, entrepreneurs that are in their first or second year and teaching them everything they need to know, which is also very fulfilling for me. But as you can imagine, they're different things, right? The focus is different for a 6-figure versus an 8-figure entrepreneur.
Very different. Very different. I had a good friend of mine, is in a completely different realm, but he said there are days I wish I could go back to my biggest problem was not having enough money. And he was talking about how simple life was then, when your biggest problem was you just felt like you didn't have enough money. And it was a really fascinating conversation that when you start thinking in 7 and 8 figures, the problem sets are completely different. It's completely different.
I want to speak to that for a second, because there's probably some people listening in the place of the problem seems to be that there's not enough money. And if we can shift the thinking that that's actually not a problem, because nothing is really a problem. So if you imagine back to when you were in high school, the problems that you were dealing with then, like who am I going to go to the dance with, or am I going to get to hang out with the cool kids this weekend, or whatever the problems you were dealing with then, they're no longer relevant. They're not problems for you now. And you're talking about these entrepreneurs who used to think money was the problem, but that's not the problem for them now. And so it's not that it's a problem. It's just a place that you're moving through. It's just an experience that you're having. And when you can stop trying to solve the problem, then you're not putting your energy into the thing you don't have, right? You're not focusing on not having enough money, or not having enough contacts, or not having whatever it is. And instantly you become solution oriented. You become more creative. You become less stressed, and you become more powerful. And so many things happen when you can stop seeing problems. Yeah. And so it's a hard jump, I think, for people to make, that, oh my gosh, I don't have enough money. But it's just like climbing the mountain. Like, all you have to do is the steps to walk from here to the top. In a business, all you have to do is, just make the calls, send the emails, create the products, whatever it is, get the customers, and the money comes in. It's just moving from here to there. It's not actually a problem. It's just an experience you're going to go through.
Sure.
And so instead of thinking about problems, you can instead of solving the problem, you can dissolve the problem.
Huh. Oh. That's good, man. I love it. Love it. So we're going to talk about your book here in a couple of minutes, but because you brought up the 4-hour work week, what would you say are the 3 most impactful books that you've read through this journey?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. I for a while I was reading, so I've read about 800 books over the last 8 years. For a while I was reading 120 a year, and that's slowed down because I have kids now. But any book so for the first one that pops into my mind is Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. And that's a book that changes anyone who reads its frame of thinking about the world. So systems or people or things that are fragile, right, can break easily. And you might think, oh, the opposite of fragile is resilient. So a resilient system, could bounce back from something. So like an electrical grid or a financial system, when there's a problem, a resilient system can make it through. But an anti-fragile system is a system that improves when it's damaged. So like the superhero Black Panther's exosuit, like it takes on more energy whenever he's hit. And so it's improving, and our immune system is similar in a way. And so this was a total brand new concept to me about what is a system that can actually improve through the mistakes or the challenges that it faces. And if you can have an anti-fragile organization as an entrepreneur, that's what's going to allow you to succeed through a changing world, or in any country, or whatever it might be. So that's just the first book that popped into my head. But the reason that is important is because it's a brand new way of thinking. And a lot of books are just sort of, they're just slight variations of thinking rather than a brand new way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to check that out. I've never even heard of that book.
Yeah, he's a I don't know, economics, macroeconomics thinker, but he's it's cool. He also wrote The Black Swan, which is showing how we're really bad at predicting rare events, right? Things like the market crashing or a meteor hitting Earth. We don't have the perception to understand like the real nature of the risk. And I think this probably applies to pandemics and vaccines and things like that. Like we're not good at assessing the true risk picture.
Wow. I thought you were going to go with the movie, but apparently not. Right.
Totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, Black Swan. I was trying to figure it out. That's cool, man. I'll have to look at that. I've never heard of it. Now tell me a little bit about your book. So you've authored a book now. Tell us about your book. Tell us about what led you to the book, and kind of where you're at with it now.
Yeah. So I also want to tell you about a book that I'm working on because, and you'll see that it sort of makes sense. Superconductors came out 3 years ago, and that was basically everything I had learned, all the interviews and research I had done. What are the most important skills that you can have to make a big impact, to do something big, make a big contribution, in addition to your skills that you've acquired from university or your careers, like you're a good engineer or you're a good scientist like me, whatever it is. What skills can you stack on top of that are really going to make the difference? So your ability to have world-class relationships, for example, your ability to learn anything really quickly. These skills are the sort of meta skills that are going to make you the only person in the world who can do what you do. And then you get into a place where you're a monopoly, right? You're the only individual. So you become really rare and really valuable in the marketplace. So you can control the direction of your career. You can be highly compensated for the work you're doing. And that was why I wrote Superconductors. And so that book, it's my own personal story woven in with the actual research around why these skills are important. And then the book I'm working on now is also a blend. I guess this is sort of my style of writing, where it's like I'm learning along the way. I'm going through these experiences, but the book I'm working on now is about ego death and how leaders develop through these experiences, like travel and adventure or psychedelics or traumatic brain injury, whatever it may be, that shapes their identity, that the person that they used to be dies. Their identity is no longer who they are. And at some point they have no identity. At some point they're a blank slate. And then they build a new identity. They build through experiences a new identity that shapes them into the leader that they will become. And so this new book, we're looking at how identity is created or destroyed, what types of experiences really shape people. So that's my latest project that I'm excited about.
That's great, man. And because it's common, I've seen it so much. I've seen it in my own life. When you go through a divorce, how it really tears down your identity, and you have to start all over again. And it's been I'm 7 years now past my divorce, and I really feel like I'm just now coming into a place where I understand, and I feel like I have my new identity coming out of that traumatic phase of my life. And it's not just that, so I'm in the military community, and a lot of my friends have been to war and have been shot and been blown up by improvised explosive devices, and they retire and they go through divorce. And so you get to see these cataclysmic events in their life, and you get to see how it either destroys who they thought they were or reinforces it. And that's a really interesting topic. I would, when's that come out? I would love to buy them.
We maybe later this year.
Okay.
It's coming out. It's published by Wiley.
Oh, nice.
I'm not sure exactly when it'll be done because I keep changing it around. But here's a question that I may pose to you and the listener. If anybody's going through one of these processes where you're like trying to decide your new identity or having your identity stripped away, and I think a lot of people, right, because of so many people couldn't go to work because of the pandemic, et cetera, we sort of experience this collective ego death, this collective, who are we as a people, as individuals, as a community? When you ask questions like, what is the most powerful identity I could have? Or what, even how do I want to be showing up in the future in my family? Like, who do I really want to be? And just framing the questions to yourself to get you thinking about your identity. Then you can start actively choosing the identity. And because you mentioned earlier, mindset is so important, but underneath mindset is the identity. So, right, if someone identifies as a military person, right, there's a certain set of mindset, of actions, of ways of being that are associated with that. If you say, I'm an adventurer, or I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm a, whatever identity is going to be really helpful for you, pick that. And then the thoughts and actions flow naturally. And here's just one more example. So if you identify as a smoker, right, it's going to be really easy and natural for you just to buy and smoke cigarettes. And if you identify as a non-smoker, well, then it's also, you don't have to think about not smoking. You just don't smoke. And so it's the identity level that everything else is flowing from.
Yeah. So this is such an interesting conversation to me personally. So for 20 years, I was training special forces in hand-to-hand combat. That's what I did. Shooting, fighting, knives, all that kind of cool stuff.
Cool.
And what I saw, because those soldiers tend to stay in one place for the rest of their career. And what I saw was the ones that identified themselves as a soldier typically had the greatest issue when retirement came. They didn't know who they were after 20 years of killing bad guys. And many of them, when they retired from active duty military service, turned around, went right back into the contracting world to kill bad guys as a civilian. And they would literally say, I don't know what else to do. I don't know who else I am. And I would have these conversations with these elite top performers, some of the best people I've ever met in my life. And I would say, hey, if your identity is this, we all know that that time frame is going to come to an end. It has to, because, you just can't continue to perform that way in the military. You're not, it's really difficult as a 55-year-old to be traipsing through the mountains of Afghanistan hunting Al-Qaeda. Like, you're physically just, and I was like, so don't you think it would be important for you to now begin to identify who do you want to be, so that when that phase of your life is over, you're not lost going, what do I do? And I dealt with this a bit. So I was a professional fighter, right? And as I got older, I had kids, and MMA wasn't really making a lot of money at that point. And I was making good money teaching soldiers how to fight. And so I made a decision to retire. When I made that decision to retire, I thought to myself, who am I? Because MMA was such a thrill and such a part of my identity that how do I replace that feeling? And so many of those guys dealt with the exact same thing and are dealing with the same thing, especially, in 2021, as we're really trying to remove ourselves out of the Middle East. There's there's not going to be a war for much longer. So I find this book that you're doing completely, exciting to me. Like, man, I want to get my hands on it. So
yeah, great. I mean, it's so perfect, right? Because I'm excited for these guys not to have to be deployed over there, and but then there's it could either take decades for them to discover a new identity or build a new identity, or it can be done much more smoothly, and they can be enjoying life almost instantly. So this is it impacts a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it offline, but because there's some security concerns and things of that nature. But I can connect you with a lot of those guys who are going through those kind of real life destruction and rebuilding processes. Now they're going to have a very different track, right? Because it's going to be military. It's going to be, an identity as a professional warrior. But a lot of them are going through that right now. It's to me, it's fascinating, just fascinating. So that's so cool, man. So what let me complete, because that was super deep, and so let me kind of back off and relax it a little bit.
Sure.
So you have traveled to an insane amount of countries, had an insane amount of experiences on everything from cycling to cave diving to climbing mountains. What's next on your list? What are like some of the top 2 or 3 things that Derek says, I'm going to do? This is what I've got to do next.
Well, I like to have little missions, little quests that I'm going on, and some of them can be very local, which is really great, right? For people that are not traveling internationally right now, or that even don't have the desire, right? But some sort of framework for making what you're doing special, right? So I would go on pilgrimages. I saw, for example, a tree in National Geographic growing up around the temples of Angkor Wat when I was a kid. And I said, I'm going to go there one day. And it took me 20 years to get there, but I went and I touched the exact tree from the picture, and it was magical, right? And this long-term vision, this long-term quest of like, one day I will see this place. That was really, sacred for me.
Yeah.
And, but these little mini quests that I'm thinking of. So the one that comes to my head is, for the first time, my wife has a bicycle, and I didn't, for a long time, she was like, you're the cyclist and I'm the other, I do other stuff. But now she's riding, and we've been doing these family bike rides, and I have this plan for us to bike across Missouri and camp along the way as a family. So we can pull the kids in the trailer, we can pull our camping gear in another trailer behind her bike. And, it's a 4 or 5 day trip across Missouri. And we're shooting for, maybe October to do it when the weather's nice. And, that's a little mini quest. But so what has to happen for us to be able to do that? Well, we have to have the gear. Heidi has to be able to ride 60 miles a day for 5 days. So there's some physical conditioning. There's okay, we're going to have to get train tickets to come back. So we're going to bike all the way across and then take the train home. So there's the logistics of it. And then, the plan, the adventure starts coming together from
You guys
this
live
little
in St.
idea of a
Louis,
quest.
right?
In St. Louis. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's right. You're just 4 hours away from me.
Yeah. Yeah. And the state, is, we'll ride all across over to Kansas City, which is on the other side of the state.
And it's pretty flat. So that's good.
It can be. Yeah. Parts of the state, like along the river.
Right.
The Missouri River goes all the way across the state. And so it's very flat grade near the river.
Yeah. Right. That is cool, man.
Yeah.
One of the ones that I've had forever and is I want to go swimming with the great whites and kayaking with the killer whales. Those are two of my top ones that I want to accomplish.
Yeah.
And I was within inches of getting to connect or to kayak with the killer whales, and then bad weather hit and I wasn't able to do it in Norway. I was so disappointed.
Wow.
I was like, oh. So those are some future ones that I'm looking at. So with your coaching clients, what do you do that in a co-op? It sounds like it's almost like a co-op where, Sally might be on one track and Billy's on another, but you co-opt them into these adventures. Is that kind of how that's working?
I do coaching with one-on-one clients, and I have a group program. That's the League of Superconductors, same name as the book. So that the League of Superconductors is specifically for thought leaders. And so these are authors, YouTubers, podcasters, people that are intending to become or are, in the first few years of being a leader in their field. And so I'm teaching them how to use social media, how to brand themselves, how to do sales and marketing and create courses and all of these things to create an ecosystem of a business that they can take anywhere, and how all the pieces fit together. And then my one-on-one clients, there's a lot more, it's a lot more unique structure.
Yeah.
But then we all do meet up in person for these adventure trips and for in-person training. They're called adventure quests. We'd have them once or twice a year, normally, to get together and improve our business skills and also just go on adventures.
Where did that, so you're a microbiologist, then you become a cycling coach, and then you're an author. Well, not then, because where did the adventure coaching / group trips / group think tank develop from?
Well, it's kind of a crazy story, but essentially,
No, not with you.
A magical tree in the jungles of Bali told me to do it. The long story is, I made this trip around Bali. I was searching for hidden waterfalls, and I came across this 1,000, 1,500-year-old giant tree deep in the heart of the jungles of Bali, and had a magical experience. I touched the tree, and essentially it projected my consciousness to a different part of the world. Time, I was operating outside of time and space for 20, 30 minutes, and essentially had this, let's call it a download of information, a quest was bestowed upon me by this tree to bring change makers, to bring leaders and entrepreneurs into the wilderness for these types of experiences. So after that, I was like, well, let me try it. And it's actually really fun. And it fits with the rest of my business and it fits with the rest of the things I'm doing. But Yes, it came from a magic tree.
That's funny, man. So just so everybody knows, there were no psychedelics at that point, correct?
No psychedelics. This was just me walking, and I touched,
Right.
touched the
Yeah.
tree, and it was like totally
Yeah, just like
outside
purpose.
of ordinary reality. Yes.
Yeah.
Wild.
That's actually a really cool, story about purpose, right? You weren't doing that in this one event in a faraway land, like completely changed your destiny.
And I could have just said, no, thanks, not interested.
Yeah.
And that's okay too. But I think if that message was for me, then, I was the right person to receive it and do something with it.
Yeah. Let me, I want to dig into that a little bit more, because to me, that's actually really fascinating. Were you in Bali looking for purpose? Were you on vacation? Were you in a juncture in your life where, like we were talking about, maybe just coming out of your divorce? Like, what was surrounding your life in that trip to Bali where you had that experience?
That's a good question. I was living there. I had been living there. It was my second time living there. And at that point, I was single, and I had already sort of built an identity as a podcaster and an entrepreneur.
Okay.
And this particular trip was my girlfriend and I wanted to surprise her. It was her Christmas present was a multi-day adventure hunting waterfalls. So there's a lot of waterfalls on Instagram in Bali, and there's tons of people there, and they're just really popular. And it's actually, Instagram has changed the way people travel in a lot of places, because they're just going to the most photogenic spots. It's kind of like a quest, but it's also, you end up with lots of lots of people there doing their Instagram photos. Sure. So we were looking for waterfalls that weren't really common knowledge. So I had to get out the topographical maps and find places sort of off the beaten path where there could be, it looks like, oh, here's a huge drop here and a channel, maybe where there's a waterfall there. So we spent several days going to find these hidden waterfalls of Bali, which was really cool. And I don't know if any local has really done this, but I probably have been to more waterfalls in Bali than anyone on the planet because of this adventure. And so it was the final day of our tour around Bali that we encountered this tree. And so when I first touched the tree, it was like, an electrical shock. It was like, bzz, and, I started sweating and crying, and then I took my hand off the tree, and I was like, oh, that, it kind of scared me. I didn't really know what was happening. But my girlfriend at the time said, I think you should sit with this tree. I think you should spend time here, because when I touched the tree, I didn't feel anything, but you felt something. So I think you should take the time and just sit here and be peaceful. And so I sat down, sort of at the base of this tree. The whole thing was surrounding me. It's like 30 feet wide at the base, maybe even more. And so over the course of the next half an hour, which felt like, 1 minute, I had this experience.
That is so cool, man. That is so cool.
It is special. It's special to have something like that happen.
Yeah.
When I wasn't looking at all.
Now, time frame, how many years ago was this?
6 years ago, 5 years ago.
Okay, so just a tad bit before I found out who you were.
Right.
Huh. That is so cool, man. I love it. I love it. That's amazing. Well, listen, I actually don't want to end the conversation, but we're approaching past an hour already, if you could believe that or not. So what's the best way for somebody to reach out to you, to contact you, to find you on social media? What's your preferred method?
Yeah, my website is derekloudermilk.com, and I'm at Derek Loudermilk on all the socials. And I have a show as well. It's the Derek Loudermilk Show, formerly The Art of Adventure. We rebranded the podcast last year. But so yeah, have a listen to that. We're exploring a lot of cutting edge topics on there. And Yeah, John, it's been a real pleasure and a privilege being on your show. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Like I absolutely loved it. Well, I want to say one more thing. Do you have any coaching spots left? Like, are you open to getting new clients?
Yeah. And I would say if someone's listening to this and they identify themselves like that might be a good fit, I will give your listeners a free coaching session. And, at that point, if we say like, okay, maybe we want to work together, that would happen. But I will extend an offer to your listeners. If they want to send me an email and say, hey, I heard you on John's show. Could we talk about doing a free session?
Yeah,
that's my gift to your listeners, and I'm happy to do that. So
awesome, man.
That's how the conversations get started.
Great, man. Well, listen, it's been an absolute honor for me to have you on the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I actually stopped taking notes for the show notes. So I'm going to actually have to listen to the podcast all over again to take good notes for the listeners. And it really has been special for me. So I just want to really thank you for coming on and sharing everything that you shared, because like I told you in the beginning, you really have been an inspiration for me. So, man, I just, from the deepest, parts of my heart, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review to keep the adventure going. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue to explore the world tactically. Until then, keep your itineraries tight and your travel spirits adventurous. Safe travels, and see you next time on Tactical Traveler.